إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد. The last thing that we talked about last week or 2 weeks ago was the issue of the excuse of ignorance when it comes to matters of shirk, or what they call in Arabic al-udhr bil-jahl. So we talked a bit about that from when the author, rahimahullah, when he said that the person can say something and not know that it's shirk, or not know the severity of what he's saying, and that he would leave Islam based upon that statement, and that he wouldn't be given the excuse of ignorance. So that was the last thing that we talked about. We mentioned the hadith from Ibn Abbas in Sahih al-Bukhari, in which he mentioned, when he was talking about the people of Nuh, and when they worshipped the idols that they set up, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned about in the Quran, when he said, or he mentioned Wad and Suwa' and Yaghuth and Ya'uq and Nasr, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned these people. And Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhuma explained that they were the people from Nuh, from his people. They were righteous people from amongst them, and when they passed away, the shaitan came to them and told them that they should set up idols or set up statues to remind them of the worship that these people would perform, to try to keep them as an example. And then Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhuma said in the end, and then when the knowledge was forgotten, they worshipped them. So he mentioned, or he clearly states here, that when the knowledge was gone, that's when they performed this action of shirk. So obviously, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when he sent Nuh to these people, alayhi salatu wassalam, obviously he was sending him to a people who had disbelieved and who had left Islam and weren't upon the religion of Adam alayhi salatu wassalam anymore. So the fact that he says that when the knowledge was gone, that's when they performed the shirk, this indicates that this idea that no matter what anybody does, there's always this excuse that I didn't know, or they didn't know, or what if they didn't know. It's not absolute like people try to make it. So we talked a bit about that. The second thing that we talked about last time was the issue of judging upon the outward, or judging upon what we see from people, and that we're not required to look into the hearts of people, because we can't do that. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَلَا يُكَلِّفُ اللَّهُ نَفْسًا إِلَّا وَسْعَهَا, or that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not place responsibility upon a soul except in what it can bear, or except in what it can do. So obviously we know that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us rulings, or Islamic rulings to follow, that obviously it's possible for us to follow them. So if we know it's possible for us to follow them, and we know that it's not possible for us to know what's in the hearts, then we know that that's not what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has charged us with, or made us responsible with doing. And we talked about the hadith of Usama ibn Zayd radiallahu anhu, in which he killed a person, and before he killed him, the person said La ilaha illallah, and then he came to the Prophet ﷺ and told him about this story of what had happened. And he said, did you kill him after he said La ilaha illallah? So Usama radiallahu anhu said, he only said so out of fear of being killed. So he said, did you open it? Did you open up his heart to know whether it said it or not? So meaning whether his heart declared this truthfully. And we talked about how this is actually, according to Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, the correct way of looking at this hadith is that we judge upon the outside, and we don't have to know what's in the inside in order to judge. And in order to deal with someone as a Muslim or a non-Muslim, we don't have to look into their hearts, and we don't need to know what's in their hearts, as opposed to what the groups such as the Murji'ah and other groups of Bid'ah, what they say is that you have to know what's in the heart before you can deal with anyone as a certain way. When we know that that's impossible, and we know here that the Prophet ﷺ, he admonished, or he criticized Usama radiallahu anhu for not going upon what was apparent to him. So Usama made an assumption about what was in his heart when what he saw was the opposite of that. So the Prophet ﷺ rejected this from him, and it isn't the opposite. So this is where we left off last time. So the next thing that we'll talk about is the author, he says, and know that Allah subhanahu, from his wisdom, did not send a prophet with Tawheed except that he placed enemies for him, as he Ta'ala stated, وَكَذَلِكَ جَعَلْنَا لِكُلِّ نَبِيٍّ عَدُوًّا شَيَاطِينَ الْإِنسِ وَالْجِنِّ يُوحِي بَعْضُهُمْ إِلَى بَعْضٍ زُخْرُفَ الْقَوْلِ غُرُورًا وَلَوْ شَاءَ رَبُّكَ مَا فَعَلُوهُ فَذَرْهُمْ وَمَا يَفْتَرُونَ, which translates as, and so we have appointed for every prophet enemies, shayateen among the mankind and jinn, inspiring one another with adorned speech as a delusion. If your Lord had so willed, they would not have done it, so leave them alone with their fabrications. And that's from Surah Al-An'am 112. And then the author says, and it's possible that the enemies of Tawheed may have many sciences or much knowledge and books and arguments that they will use, as Allah, or as He Ta'ala stated, فَلَمَّا جَاءَتْهُمْ رُسُلُهُمْ بِالْبَيِّنَاتِ فَرِحُوا بِمَا عِنْدَهُمْ مِنَ الْعِلْمِ وَحَاقَ بِهِمْ مَا كَانُوا بِهِ يَسْتَهْزِئُونَ. Or that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, then when their messengers came to them with clear proofs, they were glad with that which of the knowledge that they had, and that at which they used to mock surrounded them. And that's from Surah Al-Ghafir, verse 83. So this is what the author says here. So there's a number of points that we can take from this section that the author says. The first is that the shayateen can be, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, ins and jinn. So the idea that the shayateen are only from the jinn, we know that this is a mistake. The shaitan or a devil can be from the ins and from the jinn. So if they're a disbeliever and they call to disbelief and they try to get people to leave Islam or to stay away from Islam, and they try to spread fasad or mischief or corruption in the earth, and this can also be labeled as a shaitan, whether it's from the humans or the jinn. And this is clear in this verse. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala refers to the shayateen of the ins and of the jinn. And in Surah An-Nas, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَمِنَ الْجِنَّةِ وَالنَّاسِ, or from the jinn and from the people, when referring to the shayateen. So we know that this is something that is possible, and we don't restrict shayateen to being from the jinn. So this is the first point to mention from this. The second is, he said that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not send a prophet except that He placed or made for them enemies from their people, or from the shayateen of the ins and the jinn. So this is the other point here, is that, like we talked about many times before, the difference between a prophet and a messenger. We know that there's a difference, but the idea that a prophet is someone who receives revelation but isn't commanded or doesn't have to go tell the people about it, that this is a mistaken concept, and that the difference between a prophet and a messenger isn't that one is sent and one isn't sent. And we talked about this many times before. So both a prophet and a messenger is sent and commanded to go out and teach what they came with, but the difference is some come with new shara'a or new legislation, and others judge with the legislation that came before them with the messengers. So this is the stronger opinion about what the difference between a messenger and a prophet is. The next point in what the author mentions is when he says that it's from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's wisdom that He doesn't place or doesn't make, or He doesn't send a prophet except that He makes or places enemies for them. So this is a point about the qadr, and we talked a bit about this when we had the sharh or the explanation of al-usul al-thalatha, when we talked a bit about the qadr or the predestination. So here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we can say that there's two types of when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes or places these things, and in Arabic it's the ja'al, or that He makes, or so we can say there's two types. The first is al-ja'al al-qadri, and the second is al-ja'al al-shar'i, or when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala places or makes things, there's two types. One is related to the legislation or to the sharia, and the second is related to the qadr, or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's creating of the universe and how things are laid out, and how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala predestines things to take place. So the first that we'll talk about is the shar'i, or the ja'al, al-ja'al al-shar'i, and this is something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves, or He accepts it and He's pleased with it. And an example of this is when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, جعل الله الكعبة البيت الحرام قياما للناس والشهر الحرام والهدي والقلائد ذلك لتعلموا أن الله يعلم ما في السماوات وما في الأرض وأن الله بكل شيء عليم. Or that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, which means Allah has made the Kaaba, the sacred house, an asylum of security and Hajj and Umrah for mankind, and also the sacred month, so meaning Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made these sacred months, and the animals of offerings and the garlanded, that you may know that Allah has knowledge of all that is in the heavens and all that is in the earth, and that Allah is all knower of each and everything. And that's from Surah Al-Ma'idah 97. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also said, وَجَعَلَهَا كَلِمَةً بَاقِيَةً فِي عَقِبِهِ لَعَلَّهُمْ يَرْجِعُونَ. Or that which translates as, when he was speaking about the trials and the da'wah of Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam, that he said, and he made it a word lasting amongst his offspring, that they may turn back. And that's Az-Zukhruf 28. So this is a type of ja'al, or type of taqdeer, or type of qadar, that, or a type of decision making that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes with regards to the sharia. So these are things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chooses, and people may follow it and they may not follow it. So just like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala legislates and He is pleased with or wishes or decides that people should enter Islam and they should pray and they should fast and they should stay away from shirk and so on and so on. These are things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has commanded, but people may follow it and they may not follow it. As opposed to the other type of command, or the other type of ja'al, or the other type of mashi'a, or the other type of irada or will that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has, that is the qadari, or that relates to the universe and the creating of the universe. So, and this is another evidence for this, or an evidence for this is when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, Ya ayyuhan nas, إِنَّا خَلَقْنَاكُم مِّن ذَكَرٍ وَأُنثَى وَجَعَلْنَاكُمْ شُعُوبًا وَقَبَائِلَ لِتَعَارَفُوا إِنَّ أَكْرَمَكُمْ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ أَتْقَاكُمْ. Or that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, O mankind, we have created you from a male and a female, and made you into nations and tribes, that you may know one another. Indeed, the most honorable of you with Allah is the most God-fearing of you, or the one who has the most taqwa. So this is from Al-Hujurat, verse 13. So here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned that He made something a certain way, but it's not a command. It's not something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala expects from us to do. This is something of the way He created us, and it's the way that He predestined things to be. So this is similar to when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has His irada, or His will, that there's two types. So this is something that people have no escape from. People can't decide to be this way or not be this way. This is how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created things. So similar to when we say that if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wishes someone to die, this isn't a choice that someone has. It's something that was predestined upon them, and they don't escape it, and they don't have a choice whether they want to follow it or not, even though this is a decision from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Likewise, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decides to legislate something to be obligatory or haram, people in this situation, they have a choice to follow this thing or not. So this is where, or the point of knowing this is that there's many groups of Muslims that have went astray when it comes to this issue, and it's because some will say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has forced people to do everything that they do. So people have no choice. So if the person performs zina, they'll say, well, this is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala willed this for this to happen. So if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala willed this to happen or wished for this to happen, then obviously that I'm doing what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants me to do. And the opposite is that people will go to the other extreme and say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has no involvement whatsoever in what we do or what we say. So they'll go to the other extreme and say that. And what this leads to is that people will say, well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't even know what happened until after it takes place. So this is, and there's a number of steps how they get to this idea, but the basis of this dispute, or the basis of this misguidance, is that people don't differentiate between when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wills something, or wishes something, or expects something, or legislates something, or commands something. There can be two types. One is related to the sharia, that we have a choice to follow or not, and the second is related to the creation and related to the how the universe itself works. So this is just a point that I wanted to touch upon, and we went into it in a little bit more detail before. And another evidence for this as well is when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَهُوَ الَّذِي جَعَلَ لَكُمُ اللَّيْلَ لِبَاسًا وَالنَّوْمَ سُبَاتًا وَجَعَلَ النَّهَارَ نُشُورًا. Or that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, which means, and it is He who makes the night a covering for you and the sleep a repose, and makes the day as a nushur, or a thing to go out and spread, to go out and spread out amongst the earth. And that's from Surah Al-Furqan, verse 37. So here we see that there's another evidence that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there's certain things that He's preordained or predestined that we have no choice with. So we have no choice about the heavens and the earth and how they work and that type of thing. Yet this is also from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's decisions. And then the author said, and he'll have enemies. So we'll go back to what the author said, that he's speaking about when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would send a messenger and He would place enemies for him. So this is what an enemy is someone that whatever pleases you makes him upset, and whatever makes you upset pleases him. So this is, the basis of enmity, that they have a complete opposite of what you want, and their goals are different than your goals, and not only are they different, but they oppose your goals. So this is what defines the basis of what an enemy is. So if you're trying to do something and their whole goal is to stop it, or you're trying to stop something and their whole goal is to make it happen. So this is, by understanding this, we understand when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said that He placed enemies for all the messengers. If we look through the seerah of the messengers, then we see that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned about either all of them or most of them at least, their stories with their enemies. To explain this, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, إِن تَمْسَسْكُمْ حَسَنَةٌ تَسُؤْهُمْ وَإِن تُصِبْكُمْ سَيِّئَةٌ يَفْرَحُوا بِهَا وَإِن تَصْبِرُوا وَتَتَّقُوا لَا يَضُرُّكُمْ كَيْدُهُمْ شَيْئًا إِنَّ اللَّهَ بِمَا يَعْمَلُونَ مُحِيطٌ. Or that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is describing the enemies of the Muslimin. He says, if a good befalls you, it grieves them, but if some evil overtakes you, they rejoice at that. But if you remain patient and become pious, not the least harm will their cunning do to you. Indeed, Allah surrounds all that they will do. And that's from Ali Imran 120. So this is the explanation of what an enemy actually is. That when you're happy, they're sad, and when you're sad, they're happy. So they have the complete opposite goals than you have. And then the author, he mentioned the verse, وَكَذَلِكَ جَعَلْنَا لِكُلِّ نَبِيٍّ عَدُوًّا شَيَاطِينَ. So we'll go back to that now. And then he mentioned that the enemies of the prophets and the enemies of Tawheed, they may have many arguments, and they may have many books that they have in order to try to counter Tawheed and state or call to shirk and say that, well, no, this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants, or this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pleased with, and He wants us to make dua to other than Him, or He wants us to place intermediaries between us and Him, and He wants us to go to graves, and He wants us to rule with other than His laws, or to pick our own laws, and so on and so on. So they may have arguments that they bring to try to argue this and try to say that no, this is actually what Islam wants, and they'll come and try to take the falsehood and place it in the clothing of Islam. So if we look at this, then we see that the author mentioned a number of things. He said that they'll have many sciences and books and many arguments, and all of these things are really the same. So they each, there's some sort of, these are all interlinked in some way. So we don't need to go into what each of these means. And if we look to current days, then we see that there's many ways that these go about. So there's many conferences and many gatherings and many times where they'll gather and they'll have whether it's conferences that are international or conferences that are national, and they'll have ways of countering the da'wah of Islam or countering what the Muslimin are doing in certain places, and they'll use these things and they'll call them, or they'll state that this is what is civilization, and this is what calls, or this is what will push humanity forward and bring progress to humanity, and if you follow Islam and if you follow these things, then look what happened before in this place, and look what happened before in this place, and this is something that will keep people back in the dark ages, and so on and so on. And they'll make these arguments, and they'll go on televisions and radio and newspapers and so on, and people will believe them. Many people will believe them because of these arguments that they make. And this is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala warned us about this. He didn't warn us for something that isn't real. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala warns us about something, obviously, not only is it a reality, but it's something that can actually have an effect and can actually, or needs to be countered in a way. Because why would Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala warn us about something that isn't real? So the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, says that when the messengers came to their people, these people they became happy or became very impressed with what they had from knowledge and how they were able to try to counter it. So this is something to keep in mind, that when you see people countering Islam and they try to make arguments and say that this is anything that keeps you back, or anything that Islam calls to that will take you back to the old days, or it's ancient, and so on, that this is a complete falsehood, and it's something that is expected from the enemies of Islam, and it's expected from the kuffar, because they don't want Islam to progress, and they don't want Islam to prevail. Otherwise, they would become Muslimin. So if we look at all of these things, and we look at the warnings that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and that has given us, and the guidance that He's given us, then we should take it as a real advice from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and it's not just empty words like people might give advice to each other. This is coming from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is the second point that the author mentioned, or that we're talking about today. The next thing that the author said, he says, and if you know that, so all the things that we've talked about before, and you know that the path to Allah must have upon it, or must have on the sides of it, those who sit at it, and they have clear speech, or they have knowledge, and they have arguments, then it is obligatory upon you to know that the religion of Allah, or to learn from the religion of Allah that which will give you a weapon to fight against those shayateen. So he's saying that if we know all of these things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala warned us about, then we know that the shayateen or the enemies of Islam will have arguments, and they'll have shubuhat or misconceptions that they'll take from the Quran or take from the Sunnah and try to distort Islam from the inside. Then it's obligatory upon us to learn enough of our religion that we can counter these things. And so this is the whole point of this book, is to look at the arguments that people use to try to spread their da'wah, or spread the things that they call to, and to know how to reply to these things. Because if someone comes to you and they're Muslim, at least on the outward as far as you know, and they start claiming that something's from Islam, or this is how you practice Islam, and they bring ayat from the Quran and they bring a hadith from the Sunnah, they might be calling to something completely other than Islam. They might be calling to worshipping other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They might be calling to going to graves, or going to what they call awliya, or their saints, and so on and so on. And someone who doesn't know any better may say, you know what, this makes sense. He's proving it to me from the Quran and the Sunnah. It must be right. So if we know that this is the case, then it's only natural, or it's only logical that we would learn as much as we can to counter these things, so that if someone comes to you, you know what they're coming to you with, and you're able to teach people otherwise, and to call people back to Islam or back to the Sunnah. So this is what the author's saying. And then he says, or an evidence for this, that that the shayateen will always be calling people away from Islam, as he says that their imam and their leader said to your Lord Azza wa Jal. So he's talking about Iblis, that he said to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, ثُمَّ لَآتَيَنَّهُمْ مِنْ بَيْنِ أَيْدِيهِمْ وَمِنْ خَلْفِهِمْ وَعَنْ أَيْمَانِهِمْ وَعَنْ شَمَائِلِهِمْ وَلَا تَجِدُ أَكْثَرَهُمْ شَاكِرِينَ, or which translates as, then I will come to them from before them and behind them, from their right and from their left, and you will not find most of them as thankful ones. And that's from Surah Al-A'raf, verse 17. And then, so this is, he mentions here that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us clearly that the imam of the shayateen, who's Iblis alayhi la'natullah, from the beginning said to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that this is his goal, this is what he wants to do. He's going to call people away from the path of Islam. So if we know this, then it only makes sense to know that the shayateen that follow him, whether they're from the jinn or the ins, their goal is going to be the same as well. So we know that this is going to take place. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told us that Iblis said this to him himself. So would we then just say, okay, well, yeah, we believe it, but we're not going to do anything about it, and we don't really care about it, or we just expect that we're going to be safe from it, or are we going to arm ourselves with the knowledge that's necessary to counter these things? So this is what the author is saying. And then he says, but if you go to Allah, or you reach, or you turn to Allah and accept His arguments and His clarifications, then do not be afraid and do not grieve. And then he says that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا يُقَاتِلُونَ فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ وَالَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا يُقَاتِلُونَ فِي سَبِيلِ الطَّاغُوتِ فَقَاتِلُوا أَوْلِيَاءَ الشَّيْطَانِ إِنَّ كَيْدَ الشَّيْطَانِ كَانَ ضَعِيفًا, or which translates as, those who believe fight in the cause of Allah, and those who disbelieve fight in the cause of the Taghut. And we talked about what a Taghut is before. So fight you against the friends of the shaitan. Ever feeble indeed is the plot of the shaitan. And this is from Surah An-Nisa 76. So here, the point of what the author is mentioning this verse for is to say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has already told us, this is what the Muslims will be doing, this is what the kuffar will be doing. And in the end he said, إِنَّ كَيْدَ الشَّيْطَانِ كَانَ ضَعِيفًا, or that indeed the plan or the plot of the shaitan is weak. So we know for sure that it is weak. It's not strong in and of itself. So we know that it is possible to beat, it is possible to argue against, and it is possible to overcome with arguments and evidence from the Quran and the Sunnah. So just knowing that in and of itself, then we know that nothing special needs to happen in order to beat these arguments. If we take what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us, it's sufficient. We don't need to have anything else. If we just look to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us and how He's taught us to preserve His religion, this is sufficient for us to be able to beat the kaid of the shaitan. So if it's related to arguments that they bring from the Quran and the Sunnah, we know that the Quran and the Sunnah will clarify these better than their understanding of it. And if they come to us with logical arguments, or they try to bring arguments that are outside of the Quran and the Sunnah, we know that whatever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us, that's the most logical thing. So if someone brings you something opposite than it, then the Quran and the Sunnah will have something that's more logical and will beat that logic. So we know that this is the case as well. So this is what the author says about this. And inshallah we'll stop there for tonight, and then we'll leave it open for questions. Allahu a'lam.